You're next. That was Donald Trump's warning to Europe as he kicked off a new trade war with Canada. As new import charges on Canadian goods take effect, the US president has accused the European Union of treating his country badly and says tariffs are absolutely going to happen. The last time President Trump hit Europe with tariffs, Europe hit back and eventually they did a deal. Despite soothing murmurs from Brussels about avoiding a trade war this time, the EU is warning Mr. Trump that they're ready to take this fight outside. I'm Phil Gale in Berlin, and this is The Day. The sanctions announced by Donald Trump sparked volatility on stock markets on Monday, with leading indexes down in Europe and in the US. The US president announced the charges on imports from China, Canada and Mexico, and then backtracked on Mexico, postponing those for a month. That announcement led to some recovery on Wall Street. The European Union is also cautiously eyeing the uncertainty triggered by the White House after Mr. Trump told reporters that the EU was next in line, describing the bloc as an atrocity and grumbling about the imbalance in transatlantic trade. DW's Rosie Burchard reports.
Machinery, vehicles and chemicals are just some of the goods the European Union sends across the Atlantic to one of its biggest trading partners. But the US president's fresh threats to slap tariffs on the bloc may jeopardise those ties.
It will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. The European Union it's an atrocity, what they've done.
Brussels says there is no major trade deficit between the EU and US, and leaders here have been calling for cool heads.
There are no winners in trade wars. If United States and the US start the trade war, then the one laughing on the side is China. We are very interlinked. We need America and America needs us as well.
Some stress the bloc would be ready to retaliate if pushed.
As a strong economic area, we can organise things ourselves, and we can also react to customs policies with customs policies.
If we are attacked on trade, Europe, as a true power, would have to stand up for itself and react.
While others want to find ways to swiftly get Trump on side.
We have to propose something which could be interesting and attractive for United States, like free trade agreements in automotive industry, like, as I mentioned, buy more energy resources from United States.
The EU has been in touch with Canada after it was among the first countries to be targeted by new US tariffs. And some analysts say those moves by the new US administration may buy the EU some time.
I think if you're the European Union, you will hope that the chaos will be so big that the economic destruction that this will cause will be so immense that there will be the first pushback against this agenda. If not, well, of course, the EU leaders have been clear. There is a plan. There will be retaliation.
Past transatlantic spats saw the US hike tariffs for EU steel and aluminium, while Europe prepared tariffs on US liquor and motorcycles. Those rows were resolved, but now tensions are once again on the horizon.
Well, that report from our correspondent Rosie Burchard, who joins us now from Brussels. Welcome, Rosie. So which industries do the Europeans think Mr. Trump will target for tariffs?
Well, we know some of the industries that might stand to lose the most insofar as the biggest exports from the EU to the US across the Atlantic. That includes things like the vehicle industry, very crucial for Germany, but also exports of pharmaceuticals, chemicals, other types of machinery as well. But the truth is that they can't read Mr. Trump's mind. And so for now, these are just hypothetical discussions. But what the EU really has been stressing, and we've had officials here briefing us on this over and over again, is that they feel this kind of anger being expressed by President Trump is misplaced, because the bloc stresses that while it does export more goods to the US than the US imports from the EU, when it comes to trade and services, the US exports more back to the European Union. So they insist this is actually a complementary relationship. So they're really trying to stress that they think that there is no need for a trade war and trying to keep things calm. Will it work? Different question.
I guess EU leaders will be taking some comfort from the fact that Mr. Trump decided to hit pause on his tariffs against Mexico.
I'd say little comfort for now. I mean, this is one of the first of what I think many feel will be many mornings the EU leaders wake up over the next 4 years to a new announcement or a statement from President Trump that is directly affecting their interests. I mean, I spoke to one diplomatic source early this morning who said, OK, well, probably the president in the US is asleep just now, so maybe we have a few hours of reprieve. And of course, that really does dictate the agenda here in the European Union. But what it could do is essentially kind of buy them some time for the EU can try and brew up or put things on the table that might please President Trump, for example, perhaps more imports of US liquefied natural gas. Or, of course, we know one other thing Mr. Trump has been pushing on is he wants the European Union and its member states to spend more on defence. That's something they've been discussing here in Brussels too.
And so if the worst does happen and Mr. Trump does sanction the EU, what's the likely Brussels response?
Well, we know that the EU has been trying to get itself prepared for this. They've been through something similar in the past, and they have brewed up laws over the last few years to be able to allow them to kind of strike back more quickly. It's important to note, we often talk about unanimity issues here in the European Union, that one country blocks or another one is not interested. Actually, trade is a centralised EU competence. That might sound like a lot of jargon, but what it means is that the bloc can react more swiftly. And what we've seen in the past is that the EU has targeted kind of emblematic US exports. So things like blue jeans, Harley-Davidson motorcycles, orange juice. So that might be something they would go after in a first line to kind of send a message across the Atlantic.
OK, and talk to us about the size of the EU economy. I mean, does it have more bargaining power than, say, Mexico or Canada?
Look, the European Union is the second biggest exporter in the world, and EU officials say that the trade and investment relationship between the European Union and the United States is the biggest in the globe. So they'll be hoping that that really does kind of bring some weight to the table. What I think is a bigger question here is how much the EU wants to wield that weight and kind of use it as a threat. And there, I think we will likely see some divisions between EU member states. We heard in that report that I filed the Lithuanian president stressing that they should look for ways to try and get Trump on the same page as them. Just think about some of these EU countries which are close to Russia, which are close to Ukraine and feel very threatened by the war that's happening on this continent. They think much more about the defensive umbrella that the United States offers Europe, essentially. And we know that's been an incredibly controversial topic as well between the European Union and the United States under President Trump. So that likely could be something which sets up a bit of a battle or at least some disagreements between EU members moving forward.
OK, thank you for that, Rosie. DW correspondent Rosie Burchard in Brussels. Let's get more from our Wall Street correspondent, Jens Korte, who's in New York. Welcome, Jens. So sharp losses in New York today. What are investors saying?
I feel it was a bit of a shock when trading started here in New York that the Trump administration is actually following through with the tariff threats. Most investors believe that that would not happen. We had the Dow Jones Industrial Average at the start of the trading day down by about 600 points. Now with the word that at least with Mexico, there might be or there is a pause in those tariffs that is causing a bit of relief, and the market recovered some of the losses that we saw earlier on today.
OK. So pause on Mexico, the others against China and Canada set to happen in the morning. Here in Europe, he's promised them, but hasn't put a figure on it. And so what are we waiting for? What's likely to be the biggest consequences of a US-EU trade war?
Yeah, and Donald Trump has not set a time frame when those tariffs might be coming towards the EU, but he did say that it probably will be coming pretty soon. And if we look at European companies that might be affected most, I mean, we're looking definitely at the car industry. We might be looking at pharmaceuticals, at machinery. So those are some of the main sectors that could be impacted. I mean, some of of those companies, they do have production sites here in the United States, so that helps. But machinery, cars, pharmaceuticals, and so on, that could be hit with tariffs.
So if it happens to the European Union, what's the likely EU response?
Well, I mean, there probably will be a response. There will be some kind of retaliation, even if the EU might act a bit firmer. The EU in general has to lose a bit more from a trade war with the United States than the US, even if in a trade war, no side really wins. But Donald Trump did mention a $300 billion trade deficit with the EU, as far as I know, in the past year. I mean, we only have estimates so far. It's been a good $200 billion, but quite obviously the EU in general would lose a bit more than the United States.
Okay, thanks for that, Jens. Wall Street correspondent Jens Korte.